It is our great pleasure to have with us today, and please give a hand to Mr. Jack Henke.
Okay. How's this for projection? Can you hear me? Is this good? Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you to the Society for inviting me back once again, and for mentioning the number 51. It was 51 years ago when I first spoke at the Oneida County Historical Society. Then the Society met in the auditorium of the Munson Art Museum. Beautiful place to speak. My first book on Sylvan Beach had come out a couple months before. I was quite enthusiastic, and I spoke for 1 hour and 45 minutes. Don't be alarmed. I've changed, okay? This is only 1 hour and 40 minutes. No, not by a long shot. It's always a pleasure to speak here. I've spoken here 10 times in those 51 years. It's just a great, great place to be. They do a marvelous job in promoting history and promoting especially the appreciation of local history and presenting a diverse amount of programs, etc., and bringing history to the people, as does a friend of mine, Matt Ertz, who is the historian of Madison County, who goes out to the townships, who goes into the restaurants and sponsors programs about local history. If you ever get a chance to go to one of those programs or to go to one of Matt's lectures, he published a book a few months ago, maybe a year ago, about fires of Madison County. Do so. They're very, very good, very lively events. People often ask me, have asked me, how I got involved in doing local history in Oneida Lake and Sylvan Beach. I was a senior at Hamilton College in 1972. The college at that time had what was known as a 4-1-4 curriculum. The 1 was the month of January, and you took 1 course. History majors were encouraged to design an independent research project, independent study. My advisor, David Ellis, encouraged me very strongly to do that. And I thought about it, and my family had always gone to Sylvan Beach, and my father and my grandfather and I had fished the lake extensively. I discovered that nothing had ever been written about Sylvan Beach history book-wise, and so I approached David with that idea, and he approved it. And so on January 1st, 1972, my cousin dropped me off at the boarding house at the corner of 13th Ave and Main Street, and I paid $12 a week with a shared bathroom, with a light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and boy, was I ever happy. The next day, I started knocking on doors, and people were yes? I'm sorry. Okay. Let me move a little bit closer. How's this? Okay. When I was teaching history at Brookfield Central School, they never would ask me to do that. Okay, not by a long shot. Thank you. Okay, and the people were very friendly. And, you know, when you think about it, Sylvan Beach being a resort town, the people have to be friendly. And they welcomed me. And it was very, very good. And a few years after I started the project, I published this book, went through 2 editions. In doing this book and researching it, I discovered a map, a tremendous map, done by Charles P. Grimes of Syracuse. He was an engineer of the Oneida Lake region. He published it in 1933 for the Anglers Association of Onondaga. What's neat about this map was that it contains all the place names around Oneida Lake, the bays, the points, the sandbars, what have you. And I became curious as to how those places got their names. So I started researching. And about 10 years later, I published a book, Oneida Lake Place Names and History, in which I delve into the history of all of those names. It was a Sherlock Holmes detective story type book to write. It was fun. Great, great fun. Frustrating at times, but tremendous, tremendous fun. Today it would be a lot easier to do it, simply because we have the web. And we have digitized newspapers on the web in the Fulton History website, which has been a godsend for my research and for the research of many, many people. Back then, it was knock on doors or strain your eyes on a microfilm machine or what have you. But Fulton has made a huge difference there. In doing those books, I started to accumulate files upon files of Oneida Lake history, stories, and what have you. And in '93, I published a book of Oneida Lake stories, Tales of Oneida Lake, and another book in 2004 of more stories of Oneida Lake, from the beach to Brewerton. In the 2010s, I took a brief break from my Oneida Lake research, and I began researching the history of my congregation, Zion Lutheran Church, which started as a German congregation, the first German congregation, Lutheran congregation in Utica, in West Utica. And I published a history of that church for our 175th anniversary in 2017. And then this book I started working on. I started actually writing during the pandemic because, well, you had lots of time to do things, you know. And it came out last June. It's been a great pleasure. It's been a wonderful part of my life, researching Oneida Lake history. And I'm very fond of saying that I have the same enthusiasm today for researching and writing about it than I did back in 1974, 1975. It's just a neat subject, and I hope to crank out one more book. I've been working on it. You're going to see some evidence of my research in the latter part of the presentation today. Some incredibly neat things that I've found. In any case, Oneida Lake history. Oh, one thing, I may cough during the presentation. I do not have COVID or the flu, but I have sinuses as big as the Carrier Dome. And this is a tough time, trust me, okay? So here we go. Selected topics. First, I'll mention communities with which you might not be familiar. So I wanted to orient you to the Oneida Lake region. Here is the east shore of the lake, right here. You've got Verona Beach in the state park, Sylvan Beach, sand beaches up and down. We go to the north shore, you've got North Bay, you've got the little hamlet of Jewell, Cleveland that was once a center of the glass industry, Bernards Bay, Constantia, named for the Roman Emperor Constantine, as part of the Greek and Roman names of communities in the 1800s in New York. Toad Harbor, there's a huge swamp here. Big Bay, Burton, it's Brewerton, but I say Burton. Everyone says Burton up there, okay? So you're gonna get Burton. Down here to Lower South Bay, Cicero Center, town of Cicero, fastest growing township with clay in Onondaga County. Bridgeport, Lakeport, Messengers Bay, and Upper South Bay. It says South Bay, but it's technically Upper South Bay, upper and lower. This end of the lake is higher. That's how they designated the difference. This map here, a topographic map of the lake region, 1895, is quite good for understanding the history of the lake. Look at the south shore here. You'll see that the contour lines are far apart. This is the flat area. This is farmland. Very, very excellent farmland, well-watered farmland, rich farmland, and it was developed extensively in the 19th century. One thing that hindered the development of some parts of it are the wetlands, like, for example, the Cicero Swamp and what used to be the Great Muckland Swamp of Madison County here. I say used to be, there's still some swampy spots to it, but if you look closely, you'll see this straight line here. This is the Douglas Ditch that was dug in the 1850s to drain much of the swamp. Excuse me. If you drive through some of the roads, most of them are dirt, through the farms in the swamp here, you'll see other ditches that lead into it that were dug to drain this land. And now it's called the Canastota Muck. It's been called the Muck for a long time. It supported onion farmers, the Basilios, for example, had a big onion farm in the Canastota Muck, the Rapasadis, etc. So it's very, very rich land. You go up the east shore here, you'll see Oneida Creek. Please remember Oneida Creek, where it is. I've got a story about that at the end of my presentation. Fish Creek, which is now Fish River, it's flooding tremendously as I speak right now. I don't know if it's into the village of Sylvan Beach, but all the roads near the creek are just inundated with water. And then you look at the North Shore, excuse me, and you'll see that the contour lines are closer together. That's because the land rises relatively quickly. What this did was it created fast-moving streams that provided water power for small industries, grist mills, sawmills, what have you, and helped the development of this region. In 1800, on the eve of development, the Oneida Lake region possessed invaluable resources, just ripe for the picking. This is a painting that was done in 1875 by the famous artist Albert Bierstadt, who was a member of the Hudson River School of Painting. He came to the lake, visited there, made sketches, and he painted this in 1875. You might wonder what a member of the Hudson River School of Painting, who for the most part painted Western scenes, was doing around Oneida Lake. Well, Bierstadt's first wife was Rosalie Osborne, daughter of Amos Osborne, a prominent hop dealer in Waterville. And the Bierstadts would come and visit Amos and the family there. And Amos was really interested in the natural history of New York State. And he took Bierstadt on various trips. And this was done at Sylvan Beach. It wasn't a Sylvan Beach then. This was just one of those sojourns that they did. Okay, I mentioned the South Shore. Flat, excellent farmland was abundance. This is what I used to call the Great Lakeport Field. It's now condominiums and development, but it was gorgeous, just gorgeous. It was the last crop field that led down to the lake, among the various fields and highways that stretch around the lake. It's just west of Lakeport. I always used to stop there, always used to take pictures, and when I was younger, my better half and I would jump on top of some of these bales. Just a great, great, beautiful place to be. I miss it, but development does occur. The North Shore, Scriba Creek, Constantia, fast-running streams, they powered the mills. The fish population of Oneida Lake has always brought people to the lake. Commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, etc. The lake is extremely rich. It's a mesotrophic lake. The food web at the bottom is just packed with life, from the algae, the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the little bugs in the lake, to the various forage fish, buckeye minnows, shad, gobies, etc. This, of course, since you have a huge food web at the bottom, a huge base for it, supports the game fish up top. And these fellows here obviously had a good fishing trip. Interesting story behind this picture. This picture is, like much of history, is a resurrection of a neat part of the past. A friend of mine, Jack Zorn, gave this to me. He purchased some land on one of the back sets in Sylvan Beach, the Cove. You're familiar with the Cove, the Oneida Resort there. And the land contained an old garage that had experienced a fire. And Jack found this tintype and another one and a sign for a boat livery in the garage. He cleaned up the sign for the boat livery. He gave me that too, and gave me the tintypes. You didn't dare touch the tintypes. This was 1979. This was smoke damage beyond belief. But in the late 1990s, Photoshop came around. And I brought the tintypes to Guy, remember Guy Danella? Danella's Photographic, okay? Tremendous person there. And Guy and his crew restored them. And all of a sudden, this image from the past is with us today. Really neat. In my recent book, I talked about groups of people that took advantage of the lake's resources. The farmers, hotel developers, owners, the oarsmen, that's what they used to call the first guides around the lake. The boat builders, the boatmen there, the boaters. Fish pirates, of course. Fish pirates were people who illegally netted fish. They provided a lot of colorful stories and an awful lot of economic input into the lake throughout its history. First group, farmers in the land. This is a farm very close to the lake shore near Cicero. It was up for sale. I managed to find online a couple pictures of it. Absolutely gorgeous farm, beautiful land. You can see how the South Shore is flat. You can understand why this would attract various developers, etc., and farmers. And what was kind of neat about this was the farm was advertised on the back of postcards. I've never seen real estate marketed on the back of postcards, but we're talking at a very, very different time, early 1900s in American history. What's kind of cool is the writing on the right, which talks about the assets of the farm. You've got a macadam road all the way from Syracuse. You can grow wheat, corn, barley, clover, timothy, equal to Iowa lands. 15 cows, if desired. Price $3,800, $500 cash down, good house, 10 rooms, basement barn, 2 apple orchards, a sugar orchard, that's how they describe the maple trees, pears, plums, cherries, summer resort, 1/2 mile, 11 miles from the city. How can you beat that? You know, I take 2 at 3,800. Oh, Lordy, today it would probably be about 3,800,000. I mentioned the water power. The farmers gravitated to various settlements around the lake, Bridgeport, Lakeport, Cleveland, Constantia, etc., where there were mills that could provide water power, that were powered rather by water power, mills that could grind their grain. Businesses in these communities would sell their various products and things. These communities were centers of rural life. And farmers, until probably the 1940s, were the majority of people that lived around the lake shore. The farms were huge. Many of the farmers supplemented their income through commercial fishing. It was only natural. They had lots of waterfront. The lake was rich in fish. Fish could bring income. Very, very common. This scene was at Billington Bay, west of Bridgeport. Probably the most famous farm, I think many of you have heard about it, on the lake was the old stone barn east of Cleveland on the North Shore. It was finished in 1906. It was formerly a dairy farm. It's now owned by actor Adrian Brody. This is a picture of the stone barn, probably in the 1920s, around in there. What's kind of cool about it is that you don't see trees for the most part. The first farmers denuded the landscape. The stone barn is probably 1.5 miles to 2 miles from the lake shore. You could easily see it from the lake back then. And it was used by the fishermen as a lineup point to locate their places. Remember, this was the time when fishermen didn't have electronics. They had to use their brains. They had to use compasses, okay? And basically find the spots that way. Winter was an active time for farmers around Oneida Lake. They cut ice to fill their ice houses, and they sold blocks of ice to ice dealers. There were ice dealers in South Bay, in Sylvan Beach. It was huge in Sylvan Beach. Burton had a couple ice dealers, and farmers would bring their ice in there. The lake was a big highway in the winter, by the way. Winters back then were worse than the last winter we had now. During the past winter, about 15 to 17 inches of ice formed on the lake. Back then, 20 to 30 were common, and even more. It was just plain colder. Hotel keepers and their inns grew as the lakeside development also grew. This was the Messenger's house, built by George and Sally Messenger in 1816. If you're familiar with Route 31, this was about a mile west of Flo's Diner. Flo's is kind of a landmark, very famous landmark up there. For the most part, this was a place for wayfarers. It did have, some sportsman trade, but the Messenger House catered to people moving back and forth. The first vacation-type hotel built on the lakeshore was built in 1804 on Lower South Bay and the West End. It catered to sportsmen. It advertised in the Syracuse newspapers. And it lasted throughout the 19th century. It burned in 1896. Another famous hotel on Lower South Bay, that's the South Bay in the town of Cicero, was Crown Hearts Hotel. If you look in front of it, you'll see an awful lot of rowboats. These were big, rugged Oneida Lake type rowboats. Rowboats would go with the room. And for a few dollars extra, you could have an oarsman who would take you out on the lake to fish all day. It was very, very attractive. In fact, this is kind of fun. Railroad companies sort of jumped on the bandwagon. And the railroad companies, what was it? It was the O&W. O&W Railroad that ran through Oneida used to run fisherman specials. There'd be an early morning train that would take people to Sylvan Beach, drop them off, would arrange for them to hook up with an oarsman, with a guide, and would pick them up in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock. Other hotels reflected something that was very common in Oneida Lake's history, and that was the veranda. Big, spacious veranda. In the case of the Dobson House in Constantia, the verandas wrapped around. You have to remember these were the days before air conditioning, and people had to take advantage of the breezes. For the Dobson House, if the breeze was from the north, south, east, or west, you could hop on the porch and enjoy it. Sylvan Beach had many hotels. This one here was in the act of being moved, the Hotel Leland on the Point. They had, at one time at the beach, probably a dozen active hotels that catered to tourists. And it was about 2,000 rooms total, one time I counted them, that could be rented out at any time, plus, of course, the cottages. And they were popular, awfully popular. If you've been to Harpoon Eddie's up at Sylvan Beach, this was Harpoon Eddie's before it was Harpoons. This was the Darrow House, which eventually became Tabarini's Rooms. Many of you have been to the Canal View Cafe that was established by Marge Tabarini. Jean Tabarini, her daughter, runs it today. This is what came before, the Darrow House. The most luxurious hotel in Sylvan Beach was the St. Charles Hotel. It was built in 1899 by Louis Cheeseborough. He was a financier, real estate tycoon from Long Island and New York City. It burned in 1914. When other hotels had dances, the St. Charles had a ball. The St. Charles had a coachman that would pick up the patrons at the railroad station and bring them, up to the hotel. And the St. Charles brings to mind an interesting story. One of the books that I had to read at Hamilton when I was a senior was a book called Historians' Fallacies, mistakes that historians make. It was a part of the historiography course that Professor Ed Lee taught. It was a great book. And what was great about it was that I've repeated some of those fallacies in my life. And one of them involves the St. Charles. During the pandemic, I received a surprise package from a lady in California whose mother had passed away. The mother lived in North Carolina, but she was from Oneida. And in breaking up the mother's house, this lady found a room key for the St. Charles Hotel. It had St. Charles Hotel on it. That was kind of neat. I found, you know, well, she included her return address, but I found her on Facebook, and I thanked her. And it was really cool. When I got that key, the first thing I did was I put it on my writing table, and I was working on something, and that just jogged a memory. When I came to Sylvan Beach in 1972, the St. Charles was something that most people knew about. Every source that I talked to, said that Louis Chesebro was connected with Vaseline, Chesebro Ponds. Every single person. There was not a dissenting voice from sources who were in their 80s to younger people. Yes, that's what it was, and that's what I wrote. I never checked it. So here's the St. Charles key, and I've got my computer, and I've got Fulton history. So I did a Boolean search, St. Charles Hotel and Sylvan Beach and Chesebro and Vaseline. The only thing that came up were articles that I had written. I said, the red flags were popping. The historian's fallacies got made. Louis Chesebro was not with Chesebro Ponds. Not at all. He was wealthy, very, very wealthy. That's how he could build the St. Charles, but Chesebro Ponds had nothing to do with it. When I thought back, my oldest sources in 1972 were children when the St. Charles were there, and Louis Chesebro died in 1903. He contracted food poisoning. So they were like 7, 8, 9 years old. You get a Chesebro name, you get Chesebro Ponds. Over the years, you get the association, wealthy person, etc. I fell for it. What can you do? Another hotel that many of you have heard about, I think, was this one. It was originally the Hotel Nobles. It was purchased in 1919 by William Russell. It became Russell's Hotel and Danceland. Sinatra serenaded crowds there. The Dorseys played there. Glenn Miller, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Jack Palmer, the famous band leader from Rome, they played at Russell's. This was the place to be. Give you an idea of how popular it was. When the Dorseys played there, they played 1-hour shows, like 4 of them in a night. And they'd empty the hall and fill it back up again. It was so popular that the cars were stretched. This was in the late 30s, from Sylvan Beach to the corner of Route 13 and 31, 3.5 miles away. That was popularity. Today, the most popular hotel in Sylvan Beach around the lake is the Cove, owned by the Oneida Indian Nation. The nation has made a tremendous investment, expressed tremendous faith in the beach and its future. The Oarsmen. These were the first guides. The first oarsmen appeared in newspapers, 1840s, 1850s. The first one that I was able to uncover was a gentleman named Billy Dyer, who worked out of the old South Bay house in lower South Bay. Billy and his wife lived in a ramshackle cabin by the lake. They fished all year. They sold fish. They took the sports fishing. And in I think it was the 1860s, He held the record for the number of walleyes caught during a fishing trip, and that number was 187. These guys were good, really, really good. This is Elijah Pierce on the right. He's rowing the boat. His sport is on the left. They were rugged individuals. Their skills filled the fish boxes. They had to be rugged. They rowed and rowed and rowed in all kinds of weather. Big, rugged, heavy boats. There was not much ease in their lives. They put up with patrons who were probably demanding at times. But even though there wasn't much ease, they looked to make life easier. And they did some things very intelligently. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just another oarsman, Charles Cathern and Shaw Point on the North Shore. They provided shore dinners, like some of the guides do along the St. Lawrence River, for example. Oarsmen in Burton and in Lower South Bay and in Sylvan Beach often hooked up with steamboat owners. The steamboat owner would tow their boats out in the lake 4, 5, 6 miles, and then they would row back into port very slowly, trolling, fishing, what have you. Before steamboats, Captain Valentine Dunham in Lower South Bay, Dunham's Island's named for him, had a large sailboat. And if there was a good breeze, he would tow the boats out, these wooden boats out, into the lake, drop them off, and they would row back. This is a gathering in Burton of the Anglers Association of Onondaga. You can see the steamboat, you can see the sports there waiting to get hooked up in tandem. They would be towed out, then they'd row back in. Two of my great friends up to the lake were Millard and Chuck Rogers. In 1946, after the war, they founded the Burton Bait Shop, which was a tremendous bait shop. They prospered. They were good people, intelligent people. They worked hard. They picked their own worms. They got their own crayfish from their ponds, etc. When they were kids, both of them told me they only had a rowboat. They couldn't afford a motor. This was during the 1930s. They couldn't afford too much. But barges were going up and down the Barge Canal. The Barge Canal went through the lake after it opened in 1918. So what they'd do is they'd row out into the Oneida River, and the barge traffic was fairly heavy, and they'd wait till a tug came by, pushing a barge, and they'd shout at the tugboat captain, "Can we have a lift?" And he'd, of course, say, "Sure, there's 2 kids in a boat." They'd throw him a rope, and he would tow them out several miles. Then they'd row back in. Ingenious way to compensate for not having wheels. Fishermen loved to brag. Oarsmen gave them plenty of opportunities. The stories about the oarsmen did a lot to promote tourism in the Oneida Lake region because they made the newspapers. And people talk. People read about those 187 walleyes or whatever. The fishing business is big. As I mentioned earlier, it generates millions upon millions of dollars. The oarsmen set the precedent to start that business and help it fuel the economy around the lake. Boats and boatmen took advantage of the lake's resources. This is a picture of 1831 that was drawn by Gustave de Beaumont, who accompanied Alexis de Tocqueville in his tour through America, gathering material for democracy in America. They were on Frenchman's Island. This is a picture of Lower South Bay. You can see what they had for a boat. Not much back then. Life was tough in the early days. You had the Durham boats, you had canoes, but eventually the Oneida Lake fishing boat became important. This picture is on the cover of my recent book. It's a photograph of Lower South Bay. You can see all the heavy wooden boats here in the foreground. This was the Oneida Lake fishing boat. It was made by Lindley Boat Works in Canastota. William Lindley was a retired game warden. He retired in 1888, and the boat works produced all kinds of boats. In 1910, Lauren Damon established the Damon Boat Factory in Bridgeport. And if you look at those boats, those are examples of his work. The pictures were taken in the 1960s. You can see how rugged they are. Look at the ribs. He picked the wood carefully. I can't recall offhand, but he used some southern cypress, he used oak, and he used to advertise that nobody ever died because a Damon boat capsized. And when you consider how rough Oneida Lake gets, and believe me, it's very inhospitable at times, this made a difference, made a big, big difference. Steamboats were common around the lake. At one time, there were 35 licensed steamboats there that carried tourists, towed logs, did work, did all kinds of things around the lake. They were manufactured by Lindley at Canastota and by Thomas Milton, who had a boatworks at Brewerton. Here you could see one of his motor launches entering the lake at Brewerton. Milton's son was J. Elliott Milton, who worked with his father in the boat building business there. He retired in 1932, and after he retired, he worked odd jobs, and he got into Oneida Lake history, and he recorded a lot about the lake and its past. This material is on deposit at the Fort Brewerton Historical Society. They have a museum there, a really cool blockhouse museum. It's been a main source of information for me and a good jumping off point to give me ideas about certain events that happened, and I can, take the research from there. But it's just an amazing, amazing resource. The biggest boats, of course, on the lake were the barges, the oil barges that came through. Sometimes they got caught. As I mentioned earlier, as many of you people remember, winters used to be a lot harder than they are now. And sometimes by early December, you'd have freezes, heavy freezes, that would freeze the lake several inches thick. The barge canal used to be extremely busy. Boats would get trapped. They had to send an ice-breaking tug from Syracuse to get these two out. Speaking of ice, there were other types of boats on the lake throughout its history. Ice boats. Jerry Willis, a good friend of mine that lives in Muskrat Bay, clued me into the ice boating history of the lake, and I included a chapter inspired by Jerry and the knowledge they imparted to me. These were, of course, not boats. They were on skis, on runners, and they used sails to get around the lake. Ice boating as a sport never really caught on much, simply because Oneida Lake gets a lot of snow, and you need bare ice for the most part for ice boating there. This is a picture of Don Dix and his son Don. He had a service station in Lower South Bay. He used to build and he used to service ice boats. Other types of ice boats arose in the lake's history. This is Freddie Woznicka. His daughter's a good friend of mine there, Carol Wozniak of Boreo there. You might remember Boreo's restaurant on the West End. Carol loaned me this picture of her dad, who built this flying ice sled during the war. He built one, and so did two of his friends there, Charlie Lofton and Bernie Morey. This was built of discarded material. These were used airplane engines, small engines, with big, rotors that they built. The body of it came from discarded sheet metal. I don't know exactly where they got it, but all retreads. In any case, it created quite a stir. And when you think about it, it set a nice prototype for latter-day snowmobiles and the like. Fish pirates. There were lots of them. A fish pirate was a person who illegally netted fish up to Oneida Lake. Up until 1898, the laws were very loose. There were laws banning fish piracy, okay? And if a game warden got a complaint, they had to investigate. But it was as you'll see, it was very difficult to make an arrest, and it was even more difficult to get a conviction. They used large gill and trap nets to get their catch. This is a net on display at Brewerton. You might wonder why they would dare leave it out in the open like that. No problem. If you had a net anywhere beyond 500 feet from the lakeshore, that net was totally legal. You could leave it anywheres. Under 500, you could be arrested for it. So that was a good place to let them dry. The nets were homemade, by the way. The pirates had advantages. Biggest advantage. Netting fish was a part of the culture. In the 19th century, you did that to survive. You needed fish for your family. You needed to put food on the table. You needed extra money for your family. Fish, when you sold it, when you exported it to the cities, salted in barrels or in ice boxcars or what have you, would provide you with side income. It was accepted. The people who were fish pirates were members of local communities. They were friends and neighbors, to people around the lake. It's tough to turn in your friend or your neighbor there. The lake is huge. There's 55 miles of shoreline there, 78 square miles of water, and New York State assigned 1 or 2 game wardens to patrol that. Try to do that with a rowboat. Difficult, very, very difficult there. Under the initial laws, before 1898, a warden had to catch a pirate in the act of pulling the net to arrest him. That was the only way. That was tough to do at night, in a big lake like that. Pirates were smart. When arrested, what few times that they got them, they demanded jury trials. Do you think a local jury was going to convict these people? Not by a long shot, okay? Nets, as I mentioned, were easy to replace. And pirates brought money into communities, and this can't be underestimated. I mentioned Chuck and Millard Rogers in Burton, who started the Burton Bait Shop. Their father, Jack Rogers, was a fish pirate, and they readily admitted to it. They said that as they were growing up in Burton, half of the houses and all of the churches' mortgages were paid by fish pirate cash. That's a huge amount of pressure within a community, okay? Try to convict those guys by jury. It's not going to happen. Rail connections made it easy to export fish. Every railroad train would have an ice boxcar. The pirate era got violent, and this is something that I didn't write about in previous books, but in this book I wrote about it in spades. Charles Lasky had a steamboat. Here he was working for the steamboat company in Lower South Bay. He also had a machine shop on the North Shore in Phillips Point, and he let the game wardens use his steamboat one night to raid the pirate nets, and they got quite a few. They got about 20, 25. Charles' reward was one time he was going home, he saw some smoke in the distance. The pirates had burned down his machine shop. It got worse. This is Crown Heart's hotel. It was owned by George Crownhart. I showed you another slide of it. Previous to this hotel, he built this hotel in 1888. In 1882, he opened the Ocean House on Lower South Bay, which was on Norcross Point. Beautiful, beautiful hotel. He was a conservationist. He would turn in pirates. He would let the game wardens use his boats. And the pirates burned down the Ocean House, right to the ground. It gets worse, and it gets a little grotesque at times too. Charles Shackleton, another ardent conservationist. Many of you have heard of Cornell's Shackleton Point Field Station. This is the home of the field station. It was Shackleton's home initially. It was purchased by Charles Brown, associated with Smith Corona's typewriter fame, and donated to Cornell. In any case, Shackleton was a vocal opponent of netting. He was a deputy game warden, And he was opposed to the pirates. He would write letters to the paper, etc. One morning, he had a farm there too and a hotel. He went out to his barn. He heard his horses screaming. The pirates had cut the tails off every horse. This was a nasty time, okay? Really nasty time. Lindley, I mentioned, owning this boat factory in Canastota, was one of the early tough game wardens. He was scared of nothing. He was a Civil War combat veteran. He had been shot at, he had been wounded, in the war. He got in gun battles with the pirates. He was beaten by them, but he kept fighting and fighting. Eventually, he got older and perhaps a little bit wiser and established his boat building factory. Plus, he had a really neat boat livery in Sylvan Beach, too. Oops. Lindley, as I mentioned, built steamboats. This was the Canastota. He was from Canastota. His personal steamboat. He used the boat to drag for nets, drag various grappling hooks to get pirate nets. And even after he retired from the force, he allowed the Conservation Department to use it. Piracy declined steadily in the 20th century. There were several factors there. Technology had a big role in doing so. Millard and Chuck Rogers, again, said that one big factor was the invention of the bait casting reel. Now you might wonder how a bait casting fishing reel could help, pirates' demise. Before the casting reels, anglers would go out into the lake and just drop their lines in and still fish, maybe drift a little bit, whatever. With a bait casting reel, you could cast and cover more water, and you could snag nets. And anglers, as the 20th century moved on, more and more were opposed to netting, and they turned in these nets. And the game wardens, as the 20th century moved on, had motorboats, motor launches. They could get these and remove them from the lake. Probably the most important thing, though, occurred in 1961. The sale of walleyes from Oneida Lake was banned, effectively banned. You could not sell them. And as one friend of mine said, they took the dollar sign away from a valuable resource. And now we have that resource, guaranteed. The most famous fish pirate was Jake Kaiser, but he was more than a fish pirate. He's one of my favorite characters in Oneida Lake history. He was born in Ingram Mills, east of Dallsville. If you're familiar with the area, there's a Kaiser Lake down there that was named for his family. He came to Oneida Lake in the 1890s. His uncle had settled in the Canastota area. He helped Jake get started in a farm near Upper South Bay. He worked hard, incredibly hard. He had this hotel pictured here. He had a harvesting business. Tons and tons of ice were exported via the railroad and Kaiser's ice house there. The railroad, in fact, even built a spur line down to the lake to load the ice from Jake's business. He sold real estate. He had a general store, and of course, he was a famous fish pirate. A fish pirate with a sense of humor. Lots of stories about Jake Kaiser circulate along the east shore of Oneida Lake. This is my favorite one. Jake made a mistake one night and got arrested. And the game wardens took him gave him a ticket. And he had to appear before a judge in Camden, about 10, 12 miles away. So he went there, and he confessed, and they had the goods on him. They had witnesses, and he was fined $50. This was in the 1920s. $50 was a lot of money in the 1920s. And Jake said, "Judge, I don't have any money on me. I can't pay the fine." And the judge says, okay, Jake, well, look, I'll give you a couple weeks. You know, I trust you. You're local. Just come back with the money in a couple weeks. 2 days later, the court was open again. There was Jake with the $50. And the judge said, Jake, I gave you a couple weeks. You know, how did you ever do this? Where'd you get the money? Jake looked at him deadpan and said, the same place I got the damn ticket, Judge. I wish I could have met him. Oh, do I ever. The stories he could have told. Oh, wow. Better yet, fish with him, though I might get arrested if I did. Okay, I mentioned I hope to kick out one more book. And there's ongoing research. I want to share a brief chapter of it. It's ongoing, it's not finished today. I have always dreamt of finding a treasure trove of unpublished Oneida Lake photographs from the 1800s, early 1900s, whatever. I may be able to do that, I'm not sure. Don't laugh. Facebook is a great source of historical information. There are wonderful history Facebook pages. I'm the administrator of the I Remember When Sylvan Beach history page, and we get tremendous participation. 2 years ago, what is now a friend of mine from Burton posted this picture from Sylvan Beach. Park Gallery, Sylvan Beach, New York, cottages, rooms for rent. She said it was a cabinet card. Cabinet cards were postcards or prints that were, put on, a hard background, postcard type background, they're cardboard. And I looked at this, and you look at it closely, and the photographer is telling a story. You've got these people on vacation at Sylvan Beach. They bicycled. They rode boats. Maybe they played a little baseball. They certainly went fishing in the evenings. Maybe this one fellow played his guitar and they sang around the fire on the beachfront. You get an idea of what was happening in the resort when people had to make their own fun, when fun wasn't imported electronically for them. And it was cool. I saw this picture and I said, whoa, Park Gallery. That rang a bell. And I retrieved this from my archives, something I had acquired years before, maybe two, 3 decades before. There's the Park Gallery, next door to the merry-go-round, Cotman's Carousel. If any of you know the Carousel building in Sylvan Beach, and I had a name, A.E. Hotchkiss. Had to find out who he was. A.E. Hotchkiss was Alston Eugene Hotchkiss. He was from Norwich. A photographer, he specialized in the cabinet cards. He prospered. He had this little wagon, you can see it, portable darkroom. He'd go around, take pictures of people, portraits, etc. He had a big studio in Norwich. He had one in Sylvan Beach. He prospered so much that he built a whole city block in Norwich, okay, as an investment. Rented out stores, had a studio downstairs, apartments upstairs, and he had a number of properties at Sylvan Beach. He came to Sylvan Beach, and this was key, in the 1880s. This was when the beach was first developing. It was being carved, literally, out of the woods in the town of Vienna. An online biography stated that he liked to artfully arrange his subjects. And I said, whoa, got to dig into the archives a little bit more. And I found these 2 pictures in my archives that are definitely Hotchkiss pictures. You can see that the people are arranged. And you can also see another clue if you look closely. Hotchkiss's property bordered the south side of Union Chapel. And when you look here closely, in this picture, here's the steeple of the chapel. Here is one of the stained glass windows of it. This is definitely Hotchkiss. right here. And this is it too. The writing, handwriting on the back matches this. Cool, really cool. It got cooler 3 weeks ago, big time. On eBay, I discovered a treasure trove of Hotchkiss photos, 8. Okay, 8 is a treasure trove when you're dealing with the 1880s. The first one here, oops, darn it. Okay. This is Main Street in Sylvan Beach. Come over the bridge, that's what you would see. Okay? Now, I can specifically date this. Why? Number one, there's no railroad tracks. The tracks were put in 1886. 2, you can't tell. This says Oneida Lake House, one of the early hotels. That was built in 1883. So that's when this was taken. This was probably taken too at that time. They're right, they were together. Before the first bridge was opened at Sylvan Beach in 1890, they had ferries. You had to take the ferry to cross the river. People would take the Lehigh Valley train to the Verona Beach station, walk down to the river, and they would get on one of these ferry boats. And you can see the ropes here of the ferries. This is in front, this would be to the left of where the bridge is. If you're going over the bridge, this would be to the left. Now, this is going to be disorienting because the Sylvan Beach that we know has the barge canal running right through it. It wasn't always that way. If you look here, this is the beach when the canal was being proposed. See where it says barge canal? Right here? This is the spot where the ferries were. You had the Wood River formed by Fish Creek and Wood Creek that meandered down through. You had these big bends. The settlement was here. Okay? Now, if you crossed over the back, this is where where Lindley's boat livery was, you would find this. This is the other side of that great meander of the village. And in this, you can see the typical Oneida Lake boats. You can see another ferry. In fact, I think there are 2 in here, and an early steamboat right there. So here's a bit of life of Sylvan Beach that was never documented before, that came out through these cards. Sylvan Beach was named Sylvan because it used to be wooded. It was carved out of the wilderness. Oak trees, pine trees, everywhere. And the first cottages and cottagers took this into mind. People respected the forest. They put things, let's put it this way, they kept the trees up when they did their building. You can see here, this is kind of, the one on the right's kind of interesting, I thought. Almost looks like an A-frame, but it was built in the 1880s. Which is really kind of neat. This is definitely, Hotchkiss' style is evident if you look closely here. The porch is filled with all kinds of paraphernalia. There are old cane, bamboo type fishing poles in back of the guy right here. And if you look at the furniture, it's rustic furniture, like you might see in the Adirondacks, made from tree limbs, what have you. 2 of the pictures came from North Bay. And Hotchkiss tells a little story about this hotel in North Bay. The hotel was called the Lakeview House, owned by Mr. McGilva. I did some research into him. He was from Scotland. He was an immigrant. And he owned the house in the 1880s. What's neat about this, you've got the typical Hotchkiss arrangement of people, but you look at this other picture that accompanied it, and you can see what made this hotel tick. Look closely. They had gardens for vegetables, for the kitchen. They had an ice house right here. Barns. This is probably the chicken barn right here. Chickens were important. Beefers maybe right here. In front, if you look closely, you'll see the railroad that brought people there. This would have been the O&W Railroad at that time. And of course, the lake out there. All the economic elements, the necessities of running a 19th century hotel in North Bay around Oneida Lake were in that picture. Two more things. My rewards. I have to laugh. Sometimes people ask me how much money I make off these books. That's funny, believe me. You don't make money off local history books. Trust me, the author of Harry Potter was never threatened by my circulation statistics, not by a long shot. But there's other rewards, and let me share one of them with you. Victor Serby was the first person I met on January 1st, 1972, when I went to Sylvan Beach. He was a wonderful guy. He ran the Sylvan Beach department store that was established by his parents in the 1890s. I didn't have a car in my senior year at Hamilton. My cousin dropped me off at this boarding house, and it was a very, very wintry day, and I went for a walk on that January 1st. And there was no sign of life anywhere in Sylvan Beach, except at the Sylvan Beach department store. There was a light on over the counter, and Victor was there snoozing in his chair. The sign said open, so I tentatively knocked, kind of startled him. He waved me in. I said, "Hi, I'm Jack Henke from Hamilton College, and I want to write about Sylvan Beach history." "Oh, yeah, I got lots of things I can tell you." We made a date, and the next day we talked for 5 hours. The day after, 5 hours more. I have many, many Victor Serby tapes. He was a warm, wonderful person. I wrote about him in the recent book, a chapter about him and his family. This was the department store in 1907 on the left. His parents are here on the right. This is Louis Serby, this is Ida, and this is his sister Frida. Remember that name. After my book came out, maybe 3 weeks after my book was published, I got a letter from a doctor in Ohio who said that he was a relative of Victor Serby's. He said that Victor was his, got to get this straight, great uncle. That Victor's sister Frida was his grandmother. Okay. He ordered 2 books. He ordered one for him, and he ordered another one to be sent to his brother who lived in Rochester. I responded. I sent the books. I put a note in, saying thank you for your support, blah, blah, blah. I included my email. Maybe another 10 days went by, and I got a return email from this doctor thanking me for the books, saying that his father lives in a home in Rochester. His father is 105, and he can't see. And his brother took the book there because he wanted to hear about the Serby family of Sylvan Beach. They had grown apart, and he wanted to know what happened to him. And his father said that, after his brother finished reading the chapter, that this was the most wonderful day in years, that he could actually know what happened to this lost part of the family. You can't put a price on that, okay? You can't. It was just wonderful and warm. One last story. The history that surrounds us. My last chapter of the book is called Encounters, about times when we encounter history that oftentimes we don't think about it. For example, all of you, think back to when you walked into your grandmother's house when you were a little kid. What did it smell like? Oh boy, you remember those, don't you? Okay? You remember those odors. You just can't forget those. Think back to when you walked into a beautiful church like Grace Episcopal Church in downtown Utica and just sat down and looked around. You realize that something happened. Something great happened there. You have a sense of history. I feel that often, and I want to tell you a little story about something that happened to me in relation to Oneida Lake history. I had an old friend in Sylvan Beach who was a fisherman. He loved to fish. Bullheads, walleyes, bass. He just loved to go fishing. And in the spring, he would go down to Oneida Creek. This is Oneida Creek right here, if you look at the slide. After the first warm rain in the spring, late March, early April, and he would fish for bullheads in Oneida Creek. He'd walk in. Roy Sterling was the farmer that owned the land that you see right here. Used to be cornfields. Spring was plowing time, but he liked my friend. And he left him a path almost all the time so he could walk in between fields. One day, my friend is walking down to go bullhead fishing, and the ground is plowed on either side of him, and he looked over and he saw a crucifix, he saw a piece of metal, I'm jumping ahead a little, in the plowed ground, and he went over, he picked it up, and lo and behold, it was a crucifix. It was about 4 inches or so long, about 2 inches wide. You could see the figure of Jesus. What was the figure of Jesus? It was very, very weathered on top of it. And he said, wow, look at this. So he put it in his pocket. He was still working then. He was a custodian at the Burton Elementary School, Central Square School District. So he took the crucifix in and he showed it to his teacher colleagues. You know, they oohed and ahed about it. One of them happened to be taking an archaeology course at SU. And she asked him if she could take that crucifix in and show the crucifix to her professor. Oh, sure, you know, that would be great. A few days later, she came back, and she got the faculty together and congratulated my friend at his find. And he kind of looked at her, and she said, my professor said this crucifix came from Jesuit missionaries in the late 1600s, early 1700s, that came to missionary to the Oneida Native Americans. That's where it came from. Wow. You know, I held that in my hand. I said, wow. Since that time, when I go up to the lake, which is often, I always detour down Sterling Road, and I look at this spot, and I say to myself, history happened here, and I touched a part of it. Our sensations, all of our senses involve history. Oh, you've been a great audience. I thank you very much.